Hey everyone, welcome back! Today marks the day I was finally able to make this build that I wanted to years ago. It's a Zero Forma Gauss and Zero Forma Melee Nuke. I completely forgot about this, and it's only to the credit of a recent video that I was reminded of my idea. Luckily, the build is very simple to play. Spam melee, occasionally cast Cold Sunder for roughly 180 kpm. Depending on melee, sometimes slam or use a weapon gimmick. There are two people to credit for different reasons. 2 years ago, Dystopia showcased a way to use Thermal Sunder to detonate all heat stacks, dubbed Heat Inherit Burst Mode, to one-shot Demolus for tens of millions of damage. Basically, Cold Sunder sums up all heat procs present and deals all the dot as a single hit. Blast Expedite Suffering, or Blast Expedite for short. This is much more commonly known now. Back then, I wanted to apply this in an AoE, even if weaker, to kill trash fodder. There has never been a way to spread massive amounts of heat procs in an AoE instantly on Gauss to detonate with Cold Sunder, except Heat Sunder itself, which is a very carpal tunnel simulator. A few days ago, Worm put out a video on proper Thermal Sunder nuking with Gauss on an ability spam build, showcasing how Heat Inherit with a primer can be used to quickly scale Sunder to damage cap within a few seconds. It's an amazing video that gives a deep dive for those that want to learn more about Gauss and Thermal Sunder. However, it is important to note that the showcase build requires priming and is about ability nuking, and while not obvious, requires 5 ability casts in quick succession to nuke once, at worst, and 3 ability casts to nuke at best. Understandably, while it's very strong and the type of stuff that I personally am interested in, not everybody wants to do this, because it's the same reason why Lavos isn't popular. Massive AoE nukes, but many button pushes needed to do so. But what I actually learned and never considered from the video was Corrosive projection. Gauss uniquely can strip armor with Thermal Sunder, but only when Redline is active. It strips armor equal to the percent battery filled above the Redline, requiring 100% battery for a single cast strip. The Redline is 80%, so for example, being at 90% is halfway to 100, meaning a 50% strip. This can be annoying because during Redline, the battery constantly drains smoothly and not by ticks at 2% per second, meaning it is impossible to stay at true 100% consistently for reliable one-cast strips until the Redline counter itself reaches 100% to prevent battery decay. But that takes 1/3 the duration of Redline to reach. Corrosive projection changes this, because it is additive to Redline's Sunder strip, reducing the required armor strip from 100 to just 82%. So how much battery do you need for 82% strip? 96.4, or a little over 3/4 full on the bulb that is above the Redline. So long as you keep moving, you should always be above 96.4% battery on today's build, because we only cast Cold Sunder, which also builds battery, instead of Heat Sunder, which would remove some. If you're curious why it's 96.4% battery, it's because that's 16.4 above 80, and 16.4 divided by 20 is 82%. AKA how much armor strip you would have from Redline Sunder without Corrosive projection. Thus, you only need to keep the battery above 96.4% to full strip, instead of needing to wait for Redline's own counter to max out at 100, which can take a long time on higher duration builds. Yes, pretty much on this setup, the Redline counter means nothing. Absolutely incredible. Thank you, Worm, for showcasing this, as it's extremely important to what I'm going to show next. Dystopia was the first to publicly cover Heat Inherit over 2 years ago. In the loosest terms, percent heat and percent bane mods from the tool we use to inflict the first heat proc on an enemy is carried forward for all further heat procs on that enemy. This lets you have high percent heat without needing to mod for it when switching to a second tool used to ramp up heat stacks. Abilities, notably, cannot equip heat or bane mods. Therefore, by inflicting an enemy with heat using a weapon, we can for example mod plus 100% heat and plus 50% bane. This will make all further Heat Sunder casts on that enemy also scale using plus 100% heat, aka double damage, and a plus 50% bane. But we will not be using Heat Sunder today. I don't want to multicast or spam Heat Sunder. Basically, I don't want to do what Worm's build was doing. I want something easier. So recall instead that Cold Sunder can detonate all heat stacks present on an enemy as blast damage, summing up all of the dot as a single hit. Now, these heat stacks can come from any source, including weapons. More importantly, Redline Sunder armor strips before the massive blast damage is applied. But how can I apply heat procs in a big enough AoE with good scaling for Cold Sunder to detonate in a single cast? Enter Melee Influence. This is the first time we've had a tool for weapons that allows you to spread heat procs with good scaling in a big enough AoE to match Thermal Sunder itself. 20-meter radius on the spread, when most Sunder builds run only 25 to 30 meters range. And melees can use heat mods and banes, allowing it to have much higher upfront damage than Thermal Sunder itself. Thermal Sunder spam has higher scaling, but starts lower and requires repeated ability spam to scale up to astronomical levels. Today's melee strat provides sufficiently high damage with minimal ability spam required, as so long as you have enough damage, they're still dead, right? Today's showcase was done with Prova Vandal. This is because it is difficult to have electric present to activate melee influence while also having heat present to stack procs for Cold Sunder Blast Expedite. There are two weapons in the game that force proc electric on slam attacks. Those are Prova Vandal, which can only be obtained from Barrow or traded from other players for roughly 200 platinum, and Plasma Sword, which currently can only be obtained when it's in rotation of the Nightwave shop per week. A third option, Korumm, force procs electric on its block combo explosion gimmick, and is farmable from normal bounties on Cetus. Prisma Ohma is listed as having forced electric procs on Slam in the wiki, but this is incorrect. It only has a chance, and this chance makes it unreliable and annoying to activate melee influence this way. Of course, there may be other ways still to activate melee influence that I will leave open to your imagination. Let's look at that Prova Vandal. This is the most budget zero Forma version I showcased in the video. For the 2 Forma version, just replace Smite and Reach for their primed variants. This build will be identical for the Plasma Sword. On the Korumm, you can replace both Corrosive mods for a single focused Raiden mod to save a slot. This is because it does not innately have electric, so you don't need to mod Corrosive heat to get heat alone. All builds today are intended to be used with Nourish Gauss to achieve 3 status effects, but it also works with Zero Helmet. If you do that, then all builds will use 4 elemental mods instead, for Corrosive here, Heat, and Focus Raiden to achieve 3 status effects. That would force you to drop either attack speed or range, and it is primarily to activate Nautilus Cord and Manifold Bond spam to drag enemies towards your Sunder and Influence Nuke. Banes are super important here because they triple dip on melee influence, and while the normal variant still buffs DPS on triple dip by 2.2 times, the primed version will buff it by 3.72 times. Blood Rush even alone is still strong, and also allows you to run Arcane Strike if you want, which requires crits to activate. It is recommended to use Arcane Fury instead of Arcane Strike because Redline already gives attack speed. To activate melee influence on Prova Vandal or Plasma Sword, just Ground Slam. Yes, it's gimmicky and kind of annoying, but that's why we have Nautilus with Cordon to maximize how many enemies are near us at all times. The Slam hitbox has 8-meter radius, and for the case of Korumm, just use the block combo. Bring Discipline's Merit if you want to deal with Acolytes. Let's look at our Gauss next. As stated before, this is a zero Forma build. We even have 0 shards. Consider 2 casting speed shards if you want, otherwise Madarai can offer that casting speed. Alright, we're slotting Corrosive Projection as described in Worm's video because it lowers the battery requirement to 96.4% for Thermal Sunder to full strip while Redline is active. Use default Thermal Sunder keybinds because that puts Cold Sunder on tap, which is the only version of Sunder we're using today. Vigilante Pursuit is used because we kill so fast that we want to know where enemies are next. Prime Sure-Footed is not needed since it's built into kinetic plating. While Strength is useless for most of Gauss's abilities today, since Redline buffs scale off duration, Cold Sunder DPS comes 99% from our weapon damage, and we got rid of Gauss's 1, we still want to reach 100%. Kinetic Plating scales its damage reduction equal to Strength up to 100%, so we slot Molt Augmented to compensate overextended. Do keep in mind this damage reduction only applies to Blast, Heat, Cold, and IPS. Now, we also don't want super high strength, which would be super hard to do anyways, because it would make Nourish grant too much viral, diluting heat weight and reducing the amount of heat procs we can spread. Remember, heat procs are not capped to 10 stacks, whereas viral is, so we want heat to be a predominant element. If you for some reason want to run higher strength, use Roar instead of Nourish. Arcane Fury because on our melee already runs attack speed, and Redline also grants it attack speed when above 80% battery. Yes, you can use Arcane Strike instead and use Supreme Pressure Point over attack speed mods if you really want. If you use a 4 elemental mod build on your melee, that would force you to drop either attack speed or range. Reminder that we don't need sky high range since melee influence only hits out to 20 meters and going 200 range grants Sunder 24 meters AoE radius, which is perfect for a little bit of forward melee spam followed by a quick cast. No, it doesn't require Cold Sunder for the melee to function at all, it just makes it better, and more importantly, this exact build scales to level cap. Why? Because Cold Sunder crowd controls enemies regardless, and even screwing up the rotation will still cold proc, or freeze enemies solid instead. Kinetic Plating still grants 100% damage immunity, a 100 strength, or higher against blast, heat, cold, and all IPS. If you want extra protection for endurance, just swap out one of the duration mods for rolling guard. The sky high duration makes the build very comfy to use, only needing to recast Nourish, Kinetic Plating, and Redline about once a minute. You do not need to worry about battery mechanics. The only ability we actively cast that affects battery is Cold Sunder, and that builds battery, so you will always be building battery. I don't care what you use for your guns, but recommend Dexterity Arcanes for melee combo duration. Focus School is entirely up to your liking. Our companion build is the same basic Nautilus setup as always. Cord and Manifold spam. The 3 elements on our melee, be it Corrosive Viral and Heat, or Corrosive Radiation and Heat, will easily transfer across melee influence to rapidly trigger Manifold Bond repeatedly. Besides Radar, Vacuum, and Prime Regen for obvious reasons, the entire rest of this build is flex. If you prefer Cordon pulling enemies on top of you, instead of like Ensnare on top of an enemy, then drop Assault mode. If you want, you can even bring a Primer Helstrum for extra health orbs from your synth set for whatever reasons. And do remember, the Nautilus is the cherry on top. This build will still work even without Nautilus Cordon spam. Cheers! If this is your first time watching, feel free to leave a like or better yet subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. 79.5% of you are not subscribed. I'm trying my best to get you new information out always as soon as possible, like I've been doing with the Whispers in the Wall update. Stick around if you want to see interesting memes and builds on a nearly daily basis. You don't miss out on any of that, do you? That'll be it for this video. Thank you all for watching and see you all next time.